you. If you want to comment now, great. You may benefit more after hearing what John's explanations and information, but it's up to you. Name and address, please. Thank you.
Maura McIlvaine, 146 Blue Heron Pond Road. I have two comments, and hopefully I can get some illumination on them. One is that any type of proposal relating after the amended and restated development agreement appears to be generated by staff and not by someone who lives here or has to live with the consequences of what's being proposed. And it certainly seems to be done by someone who doesn't have to live with the consequences of ARDA plus, which is what this proposal seems to include. Provisions that the partners aren't even entitled to under the current development agreement. So I have a lot of concerns about that, and hopefully John can give some explanation for why that's good for the community. The second thing I do note is, and this is something that's been in my craw for almost a year, and I've spoken to at least one member of the Planning Commission about it, and one former member of the Planning Commission. Last October, the Planning Commission approved the preliminary subdivision plat for, I'll call it Upper Beachwalker, at a time when the ARDA was not actually probably in effect. The legal consequence of approving something when under the development agreement, when the development agreement is not in effect, is for someone else to fight about, and probably will at some point in the courts. But that's the party that this provision is trying, or these proposals are trying to benefit. A developer who comes before this body when the development agreement is not in effect and says to you, approve this under the development agreement, without telling you it's not in effect. I am not sure why this community would try to benefit someone who isn't fully transparent and submit to this body a proposal under a development agreement which wasn't in effect. So I do have a concern about that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm John Fly. I live at 102 Belmead Hall. I'm at a point in life where I'm of an age where when I was a schoolboy, you had to read Cicero, and you had to read part of it in Latin. And I'm glad we don't force people to do that anymore, but I do remember a lot of my Cicero. Cicero was perhaps the greatest of all the Roman statesmen and senators, and sacrificed his life in opposition to Julius Caesar's seizure of power. Cicero used to quote a man that he greatly admired, a certain Lucius Cassius, who had been a famous Roman judge. And Lucius Cassius had a little maxim, cui bono in Latin. And he said that whenever he was sitting as a judge and a matter came before him in law, or whenever he was sitting in the Senate in his capacity as a senator and a proposition came before the Roman Senate, he would ask himself this simple question, cui bono, which means who benefits? He believed that even more important to understanding a great issue, even more important than understanding the details of the issue, who was proposing it, or why they said they were proposing it, was understanding who benefits from this, who is likely to benefit. And so Cicero taught us that if you ask yourself who benefits at the outset, you're likely to uncover what's really going on behind the shadows. And so as I was reading this document, and I didn't try to go through all 187 pages of it over the weekend, I got to page 3, and there's a preamble. And the preamble is rather nicely written. It says, The town of Kiowa Island has initiated several amendments to ensure zoning and planning tools and measurements of governance beyond the life of the development agreement are safeguarded for the community. So the preamble to this document that is now before this commission for consideration says that the purpose is to safeguard the interest of the community. That's what it says. But as I scan through some of the details, I ask myself, how is that exactly safeguarding the community? When I look in particular at the changes proposed for Beachwalker, I am at a loss to see how the community or the neighborhood in particular is safeguarded. Somebody clearly benefits, and it ain't the community, folks. Safeguarding the interest of the community is the primary consideration that should be applied to this proposal. That's all.
Thank you.
Larry Rutkowski, 232 Sparrowhawk Road. I echo what's already been said, and I'll try not to be too long. But my view is, and I think I share these views with my fellow board members and other members at Preserve Kiowa, that the proposals made by the Planning Commission are radical, and there's no need for them at this time. There's no need to act now just because the ARDA is going to be expiring. I think these changes that are being presented for discussion are changes that really benefit only one party, do not benefit the community. And the way I would think, and previously in this, within this body, changes in the zoning code have been brought by the party who seeks those changes. This is sort of a flipping the coin on its head, and here you have the town apparently doing the work for a constituency which is very narrow. I think these proposals were virtually made under cover of the darkness through a Friday document dump, preceding a meeting where there would only be 2 business days for people to take a look at them. When I was a practicing lawyer, we did this for 2 reasons. One, to give the other side inappropriate opportunity or an inability to act quickly and thoroughly, and secondly, to annoy them. Speaking personally, I think success has been achieved on both counts. Since it's so obvious, certainly to me, that these changes are being proposed for the benefit only of the partners, it is my view that we should use the appropriate methodology, not something purporting to be on behalf of the community, but really for the partners. Ironically, I was just one other part-time resident of Kiowa who, like so many of my fellow residents, full-time and part-time, let things go, pretty much ignored what happened here, figured we had good stewardship, and nothing happened was really going to affect my day-to-day life. My deeper interest in what was going on onto the island, or happening on the island, was in fact piqued by the partners' very good presentation hosted by Kiowa Island Community Association about a year ago that had to do primarily with the Beachwalker parcels. I looked at that presentation, I listened to that presentation, and I thought about the old expression, just say no. That changing the density, allowing more units to be built was not something that was going to benefit us, and I didn't see any reason the local authorities would embrace it. One is often confronted with surprises. Here, my opinion, remains the same. I don't want to take up all the time now, but I do want to let you know that I think I speak on behalf of others when I bring these things to your attention. Thank you.
My name is Linda Leffler, 60 Sunlit Bend. I happen to be president of the HOA of Inlet Cove. I want everyone to know here, Inlet Cove, Riverview, and COA, which represents Greens Lake and Sparrow Pond, have been in discussions with the partners for months. And we have consistently been against the height and the density that has been proposed for both the upper and lower Beachwalker parcels. Upzoning to guarantee structures as high as 3 to 4 stories is not what our communities want. We 3 communities are the ones that are going to have to put up with this height and increased density on a road, Beachwalker Drive, that cannot even accommodate what traffic is there now. Even the Designing with Nature guidelines state that any new developments should fit in with their surrounding communities. Our communities are 1 and 2 stories. So how does 3 and 4 stories fit in with the surrounding communities? Why has the town planner not been listening to the voices of the community? Look at the survey taken as part of the comprehensive plan. Overwhelmingly, homeowners do not want overcrowding, overdevelopment, or more commercial areas on the island, including Beachwalker Drive. There absolutely should be no commercialization on Beachwalker Drive. There have been no traffic plans developed to handle the increased traffic coming from the upper and lower Beachwalker developments, let alone adding a commercial entity into the mix. Again, look at your survey. It does not support more commercial areas on this island. We call for outright rejection of these new zoning changes and allow any tracts to revert to existing town zoning designations.
So, hello everyone. Good afternoon. It has been a long morning for our planning commission. So those who've gathered, I want you all to know that they've been here since 9 working. So they've taken a lunch break, but they're ready to go for this afternoon session. This is a workshop. We met earlier the workshop. This is a workshop. This format is set up for us to introduce to the planning commission first formally these proposed amendments that have been initiated by the town. And so after today, I'll go through in a few minutes the procedures and process of these proposed amendments. But today's format is essentially a workshop that allows the commission to first engage in a way to understand what's being presented and to then also take into consideration the community's input along this process. So in this being a workshop format, what I'm going to do is actually work through the materials that's been shared as if it's been presented online, and so that those of you who are joining in the community in the audience can actually see each of the exhibits, and I'll go very slowly through them to explain how we got to where we are. Commissioners, if there's a question regarding, feel free to stop me at this time. And then after I go through everything, you all know that on our agenda, we'll open it back up for public comments, but I want to be able to engage with you all before we do that. So as I mentioned, today is a workshop, and I want to begin by just stating just the purpose and how we have arrived at these particular amendments that are being requested for approval of our town council, then actually review procedures and the process of the decision makers impacting these decisions. And then I'll go through actually what's being proposed as far as amendments are concerned. So today, specifically, we're looking at two specific requests. One is the base zoning districts, and one is ordinance 2013-14. In that first one, the addition of base zoning districts, that's connected to two proposed amendments. And one of those is amending our comprehensive plan, and as well as our zoning map, our official document for our zoning categories for Kiowa. And the reason or rationale for doing this, in 2022, Town Council amended our development agreement. That amendment to the development agreement moved the expiration date, the life of the existing 2013 amended and restated development agreement to December of this year. And so as part of that, there are things that the town has initiated to ensure, as one of the gentlemen spoke about, sort of the lifeline after the existing, after the development agreement has been serves its term, what now things that we need to place or reassure, redefine within our zoning code to ensure that the town is still safeguarded beyond the life of the 2013 amended and restated development agreement. One of the biggest things in there is that development agreement allowed for a dual land use category zoning for specific parcels. And this is outlined in Exhibit 13.2 in the development agreement. And so those land use categories are not reflective in our current zoning code. And so this particular amendment is requesting that we add specific zoning designations within our zoning code for those specific parcels. I'll go through those more specifically in a moment. The second one, ordinance 2013-14, this particular amendment essentially connected the development agreement to our zoning code. With the expiration of the development agreement pending, essentially what we're asking this request to do is remove that from our zoning code. That entire ordinance cannot be formally just rescinded because it also has a component of how Freshfields Village has established its zoning designation. So the standards that apply for Freshfields Village are wrapped up together within this zoning, within this ordinance. And so as part of that, essentially what we're doing is crafting a new language that will say the development agreement as it is, the 2013 amended and restated development agreement, is no longer part of our zoning code. However, we still want to be able to retain the standards that have been approved within that ordinance still in place for Freshfields Village. So within your materials, you've seen that we have produced these set of scheduled public meetings. Today is the first of those scheduled public meetings. And as part of this process, what I'm going to do is explain the review bodies, the decision-making authority, and recommending bodies as part of this process. Today is September 26th. This is a workshop. This workshop, as stated earlier, is to introduce this concept to the Planning Commission, to allow the Planning Commission to begin to prepare for a recommendation to Town Council. On the October 4th, which is scheduled for 2 p.m. at our regular monthly Planning Commission meeting, Planning Commission will then at that time begin to prepare a recommendation that will move forward to Town Council. After the recommendation from the Planning Commission, that will now be housed essentially with the final decision-making authority in Town Council. There's been a public hearing scheduled for October 24th. That's essentially 1 month from where we are today. And that 1 month period, we've opened up a public portal online as part of releasing these materials. Some folks have already submitted public comments via email and that portal, and I'll explain just a little bit more detail on the portal in a second. But these are all efforts that we engage the community formally and an opportunity for them to provide their input, their comments to this particular process for these requested amendments. So as part of today's workshop, I want to be clear that no decisions will be made today. No recommendations will be made today by this Planning Commission. The first action potentially will take place on October 4th, and that will be in the form of a recommendation by the Planning Commission. Following that, that is not final decision-making authority. That does not rest with the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has the opportunity to provide their recommendation to Council, and at that October 24th meeting, a public hearing, which that follows our standard procedures for allowing formal comment on the record for any pending request before Council. That is when Council will have that public hearing. And so all of the public comments that we have received and will continue to receive throughout this process, they will be kept for the record as part of all of these proposed amendments and forwarded on to both members of the Planning Commission and members of Town Council for their consideration. On November 4th is where we have scheduled a second reading. That means any ordinance that comes before the town requires public hearing, any rezonings require a public hearing in 2 readings. And so that's why you see those 2 meetings there scheduled, of a first and a second. So this outlines the review procedures as far as public meetings. So there'll be very vast opportunity for the public to continue to submit comments, to continue to submit their concerns regarding all of these amendments. And again, I want to reiterate, there's no decision being made today, but throughout this process, all of the comments that we will have received, Commissioners, Petra just also showed you a hard copy of some of the comments that have already come in, but we'll continue to package those and share those with you as they come in. So I'm not going to go in full detail of these 2 next slides. This is still connected to the process and procedures, but essentially this outlines within our zoning code the requirements that the Planning Commission is a recommending body, and that's the actions of for both comprehensive plan amendments and our zoning ordinance and zoning map, which we have requests for. And as stated, these will go on to our Town Council members, where they will vote essentially to have the final decision-making authority. So I'm going to stop there and then go into what material has been provided as far as each of the particular requests. And like I said earlier, I'm going to try to go as slowly as I can, stop, intermediate if we need to ask questions, clarify, and then treat it, like I said, this is a workshop format, so we can have comments and there. So when we released this information, we uploaded this link to our website. I'm going to try to make this a little bigger for folks can see. I didn't realize it was hopefully that helps a little bit for those of you sitting far. So this is on our website. And we placed this particular sets of amendments and information regarding it because this was the appropriate, as mentioned, these are derived from the development agreement itself. Our 2013 amended and restated development agreement, that was an agreement prior to, that was an agreement that first, let me slow down a little bit, go back. As part of the stuff that was sent out as these materials, I wanted to make sure that you captured the understanding of development history regarding development agreements on the island. And so the town's first development agreement was in 1994. That development agreement is essentially still a shell of how Kiowa was developed in its inception. And that's not taking anything from the first planned development district that was in 1975 that was approved by Charleston County. And so since that time, we've evolved. There have been essentially 3 development agreements that have been crafted. And today, that 2013 amended and restated development agreement is the development agreement that we're referencing that expires at the end of this year in December. On this website, you'll see that I've linked each of those former development agreements. So there's a link to the 2013 amended and restated development agreement. The first amendment to that occurred in 2019. That agreement, that amendment to the agreement looked at the terms of the agreement, and it actually was extended to 2026. The second was an amendment that took place in 2019 that looked at specific standards regarding parcel 13, which is known as Beachwalker Ocean. More commonly, this is the area of where the Cape is being developed today. And that looked at specific height standards along the, for Lot 2 under the parent parcel of parcel 13, and also clarified the dwelling unit entitlements for parcel 13 in that process. The third amendment that took place, this occurred in 2020. This looked at Lot 1, parcel 13, Lot 1, and this was also modified to adjust specific standards for that one particular parcel. As stated earlier, we had a 4th amendment, and that 4th amendment addressed the termination date actually moving to December of this year, December 4th. So there have been 4 amendments to our 2013 amended and restated development agreement. And right now, these next amendments that are being presented are essentially implications of all of those things that have been in place since 2013. So as part of this process, one of the things that I wanted to share with you all is as we go through the requested amendments, how staff has presented recommendations, particularly on the first comprehensive plan amendments and for the future land use map, as well as the zoning map. What we're taking into considerations, the existing future land use map, the existing zoning, planning strategies and planning practices, recent comments regarding zoning applications, as well as standard practices of zoning requests, and then also implications of legal ramifications for development. And so all of those things were factored in the recommendations that have been outlined today. For the purposes of this workshop, this is a recommendation that's being presented to you. You all have the ability to make your own recommendation to town council. So as said, we'll continue to workshop this, but I'm going to go through each of these separately by each parcel, and then if there are any questions, we can ask those. So the first, and I've shared with you this exhibit. I'll pull it up on the screen here. I just want to make sure that commissioners, you can see which document that I'm about to work from, which is the 11 by 17 document that has the actual recommendations. First, you'll know that in that orange column, there's a future land use designation. This is the map, our official future land use designation map, that within this map, our comprehensive plan recommends a designation for each parcel on the island. Consistently, we have a zoning designation classification for each parcel on the island. And so that first column, not first column, but in the orange, under the orange that says existing, those are essentially the 2 columns that correspond to these 2 existing maps. And then the columns in the blue are what is being recommended for each of these. So here you can see each of the specific parcels that have been outlined for consideration. And these are the same exhibit, same parcels that are identified within the 2013 amended and restated development agreement. So when you look at the exhibit and you see these identified, these are the parcels that essentially staff is recommending the zoning, rezoning these parcels based on what's being provided to you. Parcel 2, Parcel 3, Parcel 4, Parcel 5. I'll do those together. Parcel 6, 7, 9, and continue. I sort of do them in waves so we kind of see exactly which area of the island that we're working with. So in your materials here, you see the first line, Mingo Point North. In our zoning map, these are undeveloped parcels. Currently, these undeveloped parcels are on the left side as you enter the island. These are these two parcels here, Mingo North and Mingo South. And I'll also include Rabbit North. Two of these properties are owned by the Community Association, one by the Conservancy. Some of you may be familiar with this, that these parcels were acquired at the time during the swap with the Community Association. These also have conservation easements on them today. The recommendation, the existing zoning classification for these are R2/C, which is R2 residential and commercial. What's being recommended as outlined is that these go into conservation, both for the future land use designation and our zoning classification. For Parcel 5, which is Rabbit North, that is the same thing as well. So those three parcels to the left as you're driving onto the island, plan east here on this exhibit, these three parcels here, those are being requested to go to conservation. Mr. Chair, if it's appropriate, if you want me to pause or you want me to just continue to go through each of these, you can let me know if you want to go through for any commissions to stop and ask questions or anything.
I'd say continue, because if we gain more information, then who's winning your knowledge?
Okay. So continuing, I'll go to Parcel 4 on that exhibit, and I have this pulled up here. Parcel 4 is Little Rabbit. Little Rabbit is the area in the 2013 amended and restated development agreement. It's commonly known as Nounda Point. That most of those properties have been developed. I believe it's 14 single-family houses there. In our future land use designation, it's been identified, zoned as R2/C, and the recommendation for that is medium density, and that as well being, not as well, but being presented for R2 in our current zoning district. R2 zoning district being recommended for both Little Rabbit, and as you see here, I'm gonna just zoom in here, so I think we can do these together. So I just want to clarify where this is Little Rabbit, this is Riverview. These are essentially being requested to go to the same R2 residential. The only caveat with Riverview is that they have two parcels that are part of residual lands or open space on the exterior perimeter, one being fronted Beachwalker, the other adjacent to the marsh. And we're recommending that those go to PR. So that's why you see that notation there on that line to go to PR. Correct. Yeah. Continuing, I'm going to go to Beachwalker Office Park, which is parcel 9. If you all, most of you are familiar that this is the parcel adjacent to the general store. Currently, it is being used for parking. Historically, it's been a few things. It's been office buildings there. It's been temporarily used by the community association for a temporary fitness center at one point. But that parcel is currently zoned R3/C based on the development agreement. And the recommendation is to go to a Beachwalker 1 category. And what I'll do is I will give all of the recommendations for,
2, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
The development is R2.
9, parcel 9. In the development, in 13.2, it's R2, not R3. Okay, so it's incorrect on the spreadsheet, in 13.2 of the development agreement, 13.2. Parcel 9 is R2, not R3.
Parcel,
Parcel 9, if you look at exhibit 13.2, it's R2, not R3.
okay. That's there in the exhibit there then. The base, yes, sir.
If I could comment, as was mentioned in the development agreement, it is R2/C. In underlying zoning, it's R3.
Yeah. Based on the current zoning map, the R3/ there, in the exhibit that you all show for column 4, that should be R2. That's what, see column 4 in the exhibit that you have, that should be R2 is what we're commenting now.
Okay, then,
I'm sorry.
what was the distinction that you're making?
May I?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
In the development agreement, it is R-2/C. In the underlying zoning map, which I believe that's what this is, right?
Correct.
And in the underlying zoning, it's R3-C.
And what would account for that discrepancy, John?
Let me pull that exhibit so that you have that reference.
Here, I have it here if you want 13.2.
13.3. In the exhibit 13.2, so just as stated, Ms. Kay, in that column 4, it should be R2/C, yeah. So what I would do is go through all the recommendations and come back to show you what the standards are for those. Because BW is a new proposed zoning classification, I'll go through all of the outlines and then go through what the specific standards are for each of those the new categories. So this is one that I want to clarify. In Exhibit 13.2, there'll be a few examples of this. In 13.2, that exhibit, right now we're looking at parcel 10, Marsh Point residual. You'll also see parcel 8 in exhibit 13.2. That is an overlay within the development agreement. This is essentially one parcel as outlined, and so that one parcel having a designation of R2/C is being recommended for that same zoning classification BW1, but it is one parcel. So I just wanted to make you aware of that. That is just one single parcel. Beachwalker Lagoon, which is parcel 11. Also R3/C, that is being recommended for BW-1, which is Beachwalker 1. So in the exhibit parcel 12A, and that's going, once we get to 12 and below, that's going to shift down to Lower Beachwalker. And so I'm going to shift the map here to go to Lower Beachwalker. I did want to just make a comment while we are towards these Upper Beachwalker parcels. This former church parcel that's highlighted, it's not part of the development agreement. However, its base zoning district is that R3/C. And so as part of this process, we are recommending to also clean it up during this to that same zoning classification as BW1. So I'm shifting down towards Lower Beachwalker. Yes.
In the church parcel, whatever that is. You're all suggesting to take it from R3C to BW1,
That's correct.
be mixed use for all.
BW1, correct. So looking at now towards this southern part of Beachwalker, this is another one of those examples here. When you look at parcel 12, it's in the development agreement, it's been split out to two areas. One has been designated as Beachwalker Park. The other has been designated as Captain Sam's. And so they're in this particular zoning map, if you can see that, there's Beachwalker Park, and there's parcel 12A, and there's also Captain Sam's. Each of these are actually only two parcels. So staff is only recommending that these are a recommendation for each of these parcels. The first one being this area, Beachwalker Park, and then the second one being this entire area for Captain Sam's parcel 12B. That first one, which is Beachwalker Park, PR, and for Captain Sam's, R1. The next parcel is parcel 13. In the development agreement, you'll know that this is all one parent tract. It's been carved out for each of the separate lot developments. So you see them broken out by A, B, and C. But these are all one parent tract. So if I highlight them together, it's this area. The parent tract includes lot 1, where my cursor is, the timbers, and this area known as lot 2, which is the Cape. So those, all three, are being recommended for the same category, which is BW2, which is Beachwalker 2. That includes lot 1, the Cape, and timbers. And continuing, we're going to transition over to the settlement. This one might be a little bit difficult to understand because you only see here two categories of PR and R2. But if you notice in the orange under the zoning, there is an additional C category there. And so essentially as part of this recommendation, we're just asking that what's existing today, the R2 and the PR remain, and the commercial designation goes away. Parcel 41 is a similar situation. These parcels have all been developed, but this is an area within the development agreement that refers to the area adjacent to Kiawah Beach Club. And so those parcels in our zoning category, Osprey Beach 41, are outlined as R1 and C. Those parcels have been developed, and we're recommending that go to R1 residential as is. So it's not really a substantive change in any particular standard for that area. Going to transition to Ocean Park. You all may be familiar that we've done some amendments heard last month regarding Ocean Park. Looking at parcel 43, that covered the entire Ocean Park. So as this was written, Ocean Park essentially was undeveloped, and now that it's been subdivided, there are a number of areas that have been carved out for open space or parkland. And so the recommendation is to retain the R2 as developed lands, essentially for residential, but the areas that are the residual, essentially center areas that have been already or in the process of being conveyed to either the community association or the Ocean Park Homeowners Association to go to Parks and Recreation. Parcel 50 is known as Freshfields Village, and that, okay, I'm sorry.
So I know there's 3 parcels in there that I know of being conveyed, but that parcel that's kind of bounded by Pete Dye Road and Ocean Course Drive, that little circular part, kind of,
This one here.
is that going to be open space or is that going to be open space?
So that is not part of this development agreement. That's the holdings of the resort. Now that's a different, it's not part of this development agreement. So you are familiar with Freshfields. I won't, just want to clarify where we are. Freshfields Village, as to date, our planned development, Freshfields Village. No changes being recommended there. It's just essentially making sure that the zoning designation as stated a part is 2013-14. We just want to make sure that we retain those standards in our zoning code for that Freshfields Village area. The next is Oyster Rake. And I just want to be clear to let you all know this is not the entire Oyster Rake development or neighborhood. These are the slew of parcels that are associated right at the front entrance adjacent to the Keel Island Parkway. These have lots been subdivided and there's some residual lands there. And so you see the recommendation that those go to either the R1 or the Parks and Recreation zoning district. The Parks and Recreation zoning district is this furthest away adjacent to the marsh, this residual piece of land. And then the final, the final parcel on your list there that's listed is a church parcel, which we've talked about as part of the Upper Beachwalker parcels. So in going through all of that, what I want to do now is go through the next stage. I'm gonna go back to the website so you see that, follow the trend here of how these will now marry into particular standards if a new zoning category has been recommended. So this exhibit that I just shared, that draft covers both the future land use map as well as the zoning. And yes. Yes. So the zoning designation is being requested to go to R1. When those particular lots were platted, those have deed restrictions on them, and so they've been identified essentially as non-buildable. So no homes will be built there.
R1/PR, would they just all be PR?
They've actually been platted and deeded.
So this is one of the things that, as far as a particular, a private restrictive covenants on a lot being impacted by the zoning, and it's just one of those questions that before the end of this process, we just want to make sure that there's no legal implications of us changing that designation from either a tax or something of that nature. So that's the reason why we're keeping at this designation today. So, but before this process goes through, we just want to be able, from a staff perspective, be sure that if we were to recommend a particular zoning designation for this, that there isn't any consequence of changing that designation to a more restrictive designation that would have some unintended consequences for the property owner. Correct, yes. So the first section here of amended, and I'll get to the exact standards in a minute, but this is section 12-61 within our zoning code. And this outlines the new zoning districts that are being recommended to be added to our zoning code. 1261 shows you the new two categories, Beach Walker 1 and 2. And then also in our section 2 there, it outlines how these categories marry to our comprehensive plan land use categories. This is actually just a correction being here in the land use categories. They've been identified as R1, R2, and R3. Those actually reflect to the land use categories that should be representative of what's in the designation or classification today. So that's just a cleanup of changing how our zoning code marries of R1 to low density, R2 to medium density, R3 to high density. And if you look in our comprehensive plan, that's just a cleanup there. It's not an actual land use category that's called R1. And so we're just making that correction as part of this process. So now on to the standards. So continuing, the first recommending being Beach Walker 1. So Beach Walker 1 is a proposed new zoning district, new category. And the purpose of this zoning category is to allow for flexible residential development and high quality, low rise commercial development to meet the needs of the island's residents and guests. And this zoning district would accommodate multifamily dwellings and other higher density single-family alternatives, such as duplexes, townhomes, or compatible commercial uses. Because of the limited population served by the town's commercial facilities, commercial uses permitted in this district generally are smaller in scale than typical in a regional commercial district. And activities and endeavors which might serve to mitigate against this purpose shall be prohibited or strictly regulated. So essentially what is being proposed here, this is a framework from our R3 zoning district, really that allows for limited commercial in this particular area for these zoning designations. I've seen the maximum density for these would be 12 dwelling units per acre, and there should be no more than 7 dwelling units in a building within this district. The standards that you see outlined regarding single-family detached dwellings, those mirror existing single-family zoning standards today, so there are no changes being recommended that would allow single-family detached dwellings in this particular category. When we shift to the patio homes, duplexes, townhomes, and multifamily section, you'll see that multifamily is the only change there. And that is the change in designation in the height and feet. Everything else is fairly consistent. The commercial uses are also marry our current commercial standards in our commercial zoning classification. And so what I want to do now is just, I know there was a question earlier regarding rationale for the standards being Beach Walker for this particular parcel. So I walked through how this particular Beach Walker 1 category is being presented. So when we look at the zoning map wrong map here. When we look at the zoning map for these particular areas that are being requested, the Beach Walker 1 category essentially allows to marry similar to what the existing development standards are today, with the caveat of a few exceptions. We'll wait till after to have some additional public comments. Thank you. So the third.
Oh, we'll save.
Okay. Is definition, what was your question, ma'am?
I thought you said that the BWI was high density, it was in high density, or defining the density. But then you said it was high quality, low rise.
So density and height are two different things.
Well, low rise would imply high density.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll continue, but we can chat about that. So one of the things that, looking at the zoning map, today you have a general store intersection at Kiowa Island Parkway and Beachwalker Drive. We have commercial. And looking at the development patterns here, going down further Beachwalker, the intensity of use steps down from commercial down to residential, and then back up to a higher density residential. And so part of staff's recommendation is to look at that as looking at the intersection there of it being more appropriate for commercial and stepping down Beachwalker as you get further down the intensity. So the intensity of use, the intensity of the zoning classification is how the recommendation was formed for this Beachwalker 1 category. Both the intersections of both the intersection of Kiowa Island Parkway and Beachwalker Drive today has commercial activity. And so if someone were to turn left from the Parkway onto Beachwalker, that commercial intensity would step down as you continue. When you look at the additional uses along Beachwalker, it does step down from today's existing categories, and what's being proposed would be consistent with it stepping down. The only change here, it's not really a change, it would be allowing limited commercial based on it being proximity to existing commercial. And so you would have the ability, if these parcels were to be considered to develop, you would have the ability to have limited commercial compatible with the existing residential around. The second category is Beachwalker 2. Beachwalker 2 is a higher density, the density is the same. It does have one change from the existing Beachwalker 1 that was presented. So I won't read the purpose and intent because essentially it's the same purpose and intent to allow for limited commercial within the multifamily, single-family residential areas. And the only notation is that today, for recommendation, you can see part number 3 there under B, that there should be no more than 10 dwelling units in a building within this zoning district. So that is primarily the principal change as far as Section B in the district regulations. Continuing, if I were to compare that back to the Beachwalker 1, Beachwalker 1 allows 7 dwelling units for a building. If I were to give you an example, the most recent 7 dwelling building would be the Timbers building. It has 7 units in that building. The lot standards for Beach Walker 2 single-family detached dwellings, those are the same as married, as stated before. Going into the multifamily patio homes, duplexes, townhomes, this category adjusts to multifamily flexibility for the height in stories and feet, with the caveat for that feet in height, the height in feet, I'm sorry, that structures within 30 feet of a property line may not exceed 40 feet in height. So essentially, what this is recommending is that you can have a higher building, but that higher building can only be in essentially the center point of a lot and not on the perimeters. And that the perimeters would be able to be more consistent. But essentially, the idea would to still allow this to be a zoning district that allows residential with compatible commercial uses. What's the setback for BW1? So for if I go back to BW1, the setbacks would not change from what's listed here. So wait, are you specifically asking about multifamily or for single family? For multifamily, be 25 and 20 at the rear, 25 in the front. So for example, if we were to apply a particular property, we're looking at Beach Walker 1. Sorry, I got a lot of tabs open. So with Beach Walker 1 being representative of, for example, if this particular parcel here, which is the Office Park parcel, this would allow those standards of Beach Walker 1. I'm sorry, you guys. There we go. Wrong one. Which would be 25 off of Beach Walker. That's just a building setback. There's still our requirements for compatibility buffer standards would still be in place based on our current code. So what I want to do is go through what is the other applicable standards to those two new categories, which fall under our section 102 under principal uses and regulations. And before I do that, so in our zoning code today, under our land use categories, there's these three categories of permitted, conditional, and special exception uses. So these are the way that our regulations allow to help us define where things should go, and if they are allowed to go, maybe sometimes there's more restrictions that need to be in place, or there's a more restrictive approval process based on that use type. So permitted uses are allowed essentially by right, which means these are allowed without any conditions and no special approvals by the Board of Zoning Appeals. For example, most common, if you want to build a single-family residential home, your property is zone R1, you have the ability to build a single-family residential home there. Conditions of use, these are particularly things that have been outlined as things, additional standards that need to be met. I should have mentioned this, permitted uses is administrative approval. Conditional uses is also an administrative approval. Conditional uses just means that that particular use needs to meet some additional criteria in order for it to be approved. So those are already built into our zoning code. And so this would just essentially increase the level of scrutiny for that particular use. The highest level of scrutiny for land use would be anything that requires special exception. So these are only granted by the Board of Zoning Appeals, and these requests would be submitted to the Board of Zoning Appeals in the same time as a potential project is coming for review. So if there's a requirement that requires a special exception based on a land use, that would then kick to our Board of Zoning Appeals for review. And there are specific things in this section of the code that highlight what should, or what requires special exception. So here is our land use section, our principal uses and use regulations. And the farthest left here, you see the different types of categories of uses. So outlined here, you'll see all the different things that are permitted or can be permitted within the town. If that area of the corresponding zoning district is blank, that means that use is not allowed. If you see a letter in there, it's just depending on that letter type, which P, as stated earlier, that's a permitted use. If you see a C, that's a conditional use. If you see an S, that's a special exception. So regarding the new two categories that are being proposed, Beach Walker 1, Beach Walker 2, when you talk about residential, both single family, multifamily, and everything in between those two categories are permitted uses. Those are allowed by right. When we look, and just for understanding purposes, this category was built based on the R3 category. So a lot of the use standards will not change from what's already existing in our current code based on R3. So you'll see a lot of that carry over. For example, here you can see historical sites are permitted use in R3, R2, and R1. That's carry over to these zoning districts. Community recreation and playgrounds and areas of that nature, these are conditional within being for this particular section. So those would have to meet additional requirements. Parks are permitted use in this zoning category. What requires special exception? I've never seen someone want to recommend a sewage pump in these particular areas, but if someone wanted to, that's a special exception requirement. Conditional usage are electric and gas and power distribution, sewage collection and service lines. Those are things that, as far as infrastructure, are sort of required for development, and so sometimes it's just making sure that they meet certain distance requirements or screening requirements. You can see here that special exception. I'm keeping my cursor here on this column, the furthest extent one, which is Beach Walker 2, so I know it might be hard for you to follow, but just know if wherever you see my cursor, that's in the Beach Walker 2, so you can go stay in that column, and one to the left would be Beach Walker 1. So continuing, special exception, which will be required for a bar or lounge, for a exclusive member bar for food and beverage. Conditional uses allowed for restaurant or any associated full service restaurants or clubhouse recreation type areas. And those are designated based on serving alcohol, without alcohol. Like I said, this is a conditional use. Administrative or business offices, so office, pretty much a standard office would be a permitted use in these areas, real estate sales and services. None of the sort of typical commercial activity that you would see in Freshfields would be permitted in these zoning districts. So these are the pretty much very limited commercial. If you can see to the right here where all the C's are, that's our standard commercial zoning districts. And so none of what's being recommended for the Beach Walker 1 and 2 are those allowances of additional commercial in this particular zoning area that identify with more traditional commercial uses. The ones that are being recommended align more with just simple things that we've already seen in place or are compatible with existing conditions. Excuse me. That's all of the extents of what would be allowed in those zoning districts. So I'll take a pause there for my commission and then go back to our working document. Before we go on to the next, I think we can pause here if there are questions from.
I have some real problems with the beach walker one disc.
Can I ask you to use your microphones?
Yeah, first I'm going, yeah, okay.
What?
I have a handout, which I think will make it easier for people. I've done a comparison.
Of what's allowed and what's changed. And want me to pass these around? Yeah, here I've got a bunch for the community because I didn't know how many of you would be here. Do you want one for John? Yeah, give one for John. Here, I'm going to pass these to my commissioners. Madeline, here, do you want to pass for the community?
Okay. Yeah, and I hope I have enough. If not, if you could please share. But what you're getting is I went through the development agreement, the Toki regulations, the beach walker proposals to compare what exactly we're talking about, because I think we need to know that before we make any decisions. Beach walker 2, I'm going to leave for now because I don't really know why we'd be rezoning. The Cape and the Timbers are built. They're non-conforming. It's not a problem. We don't really need a separate district. We are creating a separate district for one property owner, and that in and of itself has some issues. But let's look at the lots. Lot 9, which is 1.75 acres, is R2C in the development agreement. It's misprinted as R3 on the thing, which allows 2.5 stories, 35 feet height, 6 DU means dwelling units, 6 dwelling units per acre with a 10-unit max. The proposed zoning changes with this BW1 mixed use allows 3 stories, 45 feet of height, 12 dwelling units per acre with a maximum of 7 dwelling units per building. That's a big increase in density. Under the current zoning rules for, now I put this in here for R2. If it's R3, I'll go over what that change would be. But the current zoning allowances in our regulations is 2.5 stories, 35 feet height, 6 dwelling units an acre, 4 dwelling units a building max, and no multifamily. Lot 10 is 0.66 acres. It's noted as R2C. It's been pretty well conceded that this lot is not buildable. This is the one over by Cougar, and we've talked about it in other issues. It's not a buildable lot. The BW, but this, they want to fold into this big BW1 lot, which allows 3 stories, 45 feet height, et cetera. My concern on that is, even though Lot 10 is not buildable, this is an end run about consolidating all the Beachwalker properties, which we said previously we don't want to do. By consolidating, you're adding that 0.66 acre into the total acreage of the one big zoning lot, which I think allows more density. Parcel 11 is the big lot. That's where most of the dwelling units would go. It's almost 6 acres. It's currently zoned in the development agreement R3 commercial, which allows, 4 stories with a maximum 50 feet height, 60 units maximum. In the proposed zoning changes, it's medium density residential, 3 stories, 45 feet height, 12 DUs per acre, and 7 DUs per building. Now, it wouldn't be just that plot because it's the whole D1, which would put you over 6 acres, which may increase that 60 units, I don't know. The current zoning for this lot under the Toki zoning regulations is 2 stories, 40 feet height. You can see that, maximum of 4 dwelling units per building. One of the big issues here is the church parcel. It is not included in the amended restated development agreement and is currently subject to Toki zoning rules. The current Toki zoning rules, that's R3 on the church parcel, maximum 2 stories, 40-foot height, no more than 4 dwelling units per building. If you guys know the Beachwalker properties, the church parcel is a flag lot smack in the middle of everything. This is an end run around consolidation. They're consolidating this all into a Beachwalker 1 lot. Does this make sense for the community, to get to our Cicero person? On the face of it, no. Are there some advantages to the community of consolidating the lots? Maybe. We understand that the developers are pursuing a parallel path with the town council, which causes us some concern because it's an end run around the planning commission. We don't know what that parallel path is. I've heard a planned development. I don't know. If there is a better plan, show it to us. Would we be willing to do a consolidation, negotiate some of these things? Yeah, if we got lower heights, lower densities, it might make sense for the community. But to give this zoning change up front gets nothing for the community. It allows for a lot more density. And I don't see how it, and nothing John has said has convinced me that this is any benefit to the community. What I would like to see happen is this isn't ready for prime time. I don't see why it should be on our October 4th agenda. And we can take a sense of our commission, given it is the responsibility of the Planning Commission chair to set the agenda for the meeting, I would suggest that we put this off until we hear more about what's proposed. If there is a specific proposal that asks for consolidation, that allows for less density, let's talk about it. Currently, the other thing about this is, in the footnotes to Exhibit 13.2, which is the exhibit in the development agreement that assigns lot-specific rights to the developer, which they're entitled to. This had to be done, for those of you who don't know, when a development agreement is written, it's to protect the developer so that they can put an investment in and know they're going to get certain benefits, and that's fine. But there's a footnote that says any parcel that is noted R2 or R3/C is either or. It explicitly says that no parcel is entitled to both designations without explicit approval of the town. So it's either residential or commercial. It's not mixed use. The new designations are saying it's all mixed use, which is allowing commercial. I understand there might be a recommendation to put a club facility on the lot, which is not a permitted use. Should we do that? Maybe we should. But we've got to see the plan first and see what's recommended well before we look into doing this. Because once this is done, it's done, and we lose all control on this. And I think it's very important. We've heard from the community, and I think we as a commission really need to take a stand on this, that, you know, we're gonna wait until we see something specific before we move ahead with this. What do my fellow commissioners think? Here, I've got, wait. No.
Please, go ahead.
Sort of aligned with Joanne here. I'm concerned just this generic mixed use, future land use category, without kind of knowing what it's going to be. It does give me concern. I'd rather have it be more explicit. Again, kind of back to Joanne's point, it's either A or B, R2 or C. Without seeing the plan, I'm not really excited about combining commercial and residential and not know what it looks like. So I hear what you're saying, and I'm sort of in the same camp. I'd like more information.
Madam, you have something to say, I can tell.
No, I think for one thing, thank you, Joanne, for doing a massive amount of homework. And it troubles me to have the Planning Commission give up whatever leverage it has without seeing a lot more thorough plans.
presented to us. We've seen it too often with development where we've given up what bargaining chips that we've got, and I would hate to give them up at this point.
So Bill, what are your thoughts as chair? I mean, do we need to have this?
I've heard John's comments. I've heard the commissioner's comments. John has some other comments. Then I'd like to open it back up to our residents. And, there's a lot to digest today.
So,
This is ready for October.
Yeah.
so one of the things I wanted to add as part of today's discussion, remember, this is a workshop. There's no action needed to take it, but if there are comments that you would want a modified that we can present on October 4th, that's in the bulk of things that we can do as staff. The second thing is this is only one of the two other things that we are to discuss today. One of the things, and the things I wish you would share this with me ahead, Joanne, that we could add this as part of the discussion for today, the document that you just shared. So staff can come in and look at this based on, but this is helpful for, like I said, today's workshop and being able to understand your concerns based on the recommendation going forward. Ultimately, that will go before council.
To give you the opportunity to share your thinking behind these proposals.
Right. So I like I said, today is an understanding for a workshop. So I shared a little bit of the recommendations based on looking at the existing land use, looking at the future land use, looking at tiered effect of standards allowed from commercial down to residential. Uh-huh.
Can you help us understand that a little bit?
So that regards to more so so one of the things I want to go back to is why we're doing this. I think that's being lost in a lot of the conversation of why we're actually doing this. This is not a proposal that's being initiated by the property owner developer. Right now, we have a development agreement that is set to expire. When that development agreement expires, essentially, we've already been told by our legal staff that there are essentially, we need to rezone these parcels because these parcels have had the zoning classification that's associated with that development agreement. And so the base zoning category that's been outlined is not in our zoning code. And so that's the purpose of why we're initiating these zoning for those. And so, correct. So if you go to our zoning map today, this would be the zoning classification. These dual categories are not listed within our zoning code. So it's not that optional of choosing residential or commercial does not exist in our current zoning code. And so this proposed amendments that we are recommending allows us to say we have a base zoning district for these parcels. And these are specific parcels, not a new category being created. These would be specific parcels. And that was another part of the rationale of looking at the differences between what would be allowed for these two new parcel categories of Beachwalker 1 and Beachwalker 2 being sort of distinct. When you look at the allowances for, and going back to one of the comments made about a planned development, staff has already recommended that the best solution to problem solve these areas would have been a planned development. But that's not in the control of staff to do that. That's a thing that's driven by the property owner to be able to present that. But in the idea of putting together as purposes of the ending of the development agreement, we want to ensure that the safeguard is having an actual zoning designation. So that's the safeguard of having an actual zoning.
John, so just explain to me then, if you
And
can't.
if the goal is that there is no R2C, that we have to have one or the other, so that's why we have to do something. Why is the BW1 more dense? Why would we allow more density?
BW2 is actually the more denser one, which is lower.
Yeah, but BW1 is more density.
Than is allowed on the current allowances.
R3 currently allows 12 dwelling units per acre. That's our current zoning district. It allows 12 dwelling units per acre. The difference really is the number of units per building, which our current zoning designation allows 4 dwelling units per building. And so the recommendation is, the primary reason for changing that is when we look at the existing practices across the island, having the ability for flexible design, that's really the thing that I've heard across other developments, not just on Kiowa, but the ability to choose. Essentially, you're pigeonholing only 4 units to a building, so that now contradicts what the market may request for, of saying how many 1-bedroom versus 2-bedroom versus 3-bedroom units. And so if you've dictated that all buildings can only have 4 units, now there's a slimmer chance that you have to choose 1, 2 in the sizing. But the ability to have that flexibility is what's being brought here as part of that recommendation.
And I
I
think,
think allowing more density is not what the community is
But
looking
it's not more density. The density for R3 is 12 units per acre.
yeah. And, for
That-
example,
That isn't being changed.
okay, but currently,
Lot 10 is R2, Lot 9 is R2.
So
And in the Toki allowances, and I just focused on the residential, not the commercial, why don't we codify 2.5 stories, 35-foot height, 60 U's per acre, 4 DUs building max? I mean, that's what's in the Toki zoning regulations now. Why would we allow more?
what we would allow more of density? So the R3 category, which is the highest density category in our current zoning district, allows for 12 units per acre. So in that Beach Walker new category that's being proposed, that isn't being recommended to be changed.
but it's 2 stories high, 2
So-
stories, R3 is 2 stories, 40 feet height.
So the height limit, but not the density, is what you're saying, that the concern
I'm
is.
saying in the Toki ZLDR, R3 allows 2 stories, 40
40-foot height, 12 DUs per acre, a maximum of 4 DUs per building.
Yes.
Why would we increase that?
So if the commission wants to make that recommendation to council, that's in the wheelhouse of saying, hey, we would want a 2-story. The difference is I'll give you my rationale on there. A 2.5-story building is no different from a 3-story, just based on the 2.5-story allows that 3rd floor to be maxed out. And so that's why a 3-story was recommended there, of essentially you're allowing a full story to be completely maxed out opposed to having that half-story.
What the community's asking for is
Less density.
So I want to be clear that, I hear what you're saying, but I want to be clear that the R3 designation today allows for 12 dwelling units per acre. What's being proposed is that Beach Walker is still 12 dwelling units per acre.
And the church parcel is not currently part of this. So that's a great negotiating thing, because the church parcel is smack dab in the middle of this. Okay, it currently is not subject.
It's not part of the development agreement. It's subject to the Toki ZLDR, the church parcel.
Correct.
So does it make sense to consolidate this into one thing? It may, but I think we should get something in return and not just give this front end.
So I want to be clear, this is not a proposal to consolidate this. The recommendations are not a proposal to consolidate any parcels today. These are applying
BW1.
I'm sorry?
You're making it all BW1.
Yeah, but this is not consolidating the parcel. That's a total different, so let me.
Why would we give something
On the church parcel without
I want-
getting something in return.
So I want to be clear again on the recommendations here. So as part of what's being outlined, any particular standard, we're looking at really one section of applicable standards for proposed development. So building setbacks, compatibility buffer standards, those would still be in place. The other thing to consider is consolidation of parcels could occur with this particular zoning category. So if that's where you're saying that because these are being zoned the same, that would allow for the consolidation of parcels, that's the question, that's what you're concerned with?
I don't
Understand why we would change the zoning right now for the church parcel. Because that gives us leverage.
So
It's less dense.
So it's really, I can understand that principle. The only thing I said is if that's the planning commission's recommendation to move that as it's being R3, we can make that modification to take it from the BW1 as in the current particular recommendation to R3 as it is. It's just reflected in our zoning map as that R3/C now. And so that was why that was there. So, but if the R3.
You want to take the C out.
You want to take the C out is what you're.
But that's why you're saying we have to redo this because there are new results.
Correct. So that was the rationale of applying that because it actually has that C designation on the master, on the zoning map.
I think it's not John's job to negotiate and try and get something back. He's trying to present consistent zoning ordinances across like properties. I think it's for us to say, we don't want to zone that piece this way unless so-and-so. So I think he's done something that's consistent. We have to take the ball now and do what you're talking about doing.
Yeah, because I think the current ZLDR has less allowances than the proposed zoning change.
So Ms.
And I
Hennessy,
think our concern as a community is we do not want to upzone.
So what I would recommend then, if there is a particular category that you would prefer that parcel go to, then when we present this for recommendation, that we can have those standards outlined to council that this would be the appropriate zoning being recommended by the planning commission. So for example, if the church parcel, if you're recommending that go to R3, that's our base zoning category today within our zoning code, then as part of this exhibit that's been shared, this big R11/17 exhibit, that recommendation that goes to council can say that the church parcel is now being recommended for R3.
But I think we also don't want to increase the maximum number
Of dwelling units that are allowed by the Toki ZLDR because everybody has told us we don't want more density, it's more traffic.
So
We don't want to
I want to say, then I'll turn it, this will be my last comment, Mr. Chair. I hear your comments, Ms. Hennessy. What I'm saying is I want you to make a recommendation. We hear what the concerns are. I want you to make a recommendation so staff can put that together and then forward that on.
Bill, I have a different question. On the comment here has been that the parcel, church parcel, I guess it is, oh, I'm sorry, the parcels alongside Cougar have been conceded, that it's not buildable. How is that concession formalized?
So I would first interject here just to say I don't believe the parcel is unbuildable because that parcel can be built on. It would take some unique site conditions, but I don't deem that an unbuildable parcel.
So presumably when we get a conditional plat in, that area will not be buildable.
I'm confused by your question.
On the plat, there will be no.
No. So if there's a proposal for that one particular property, what I mean by site conditions is the access to that particular property needs to be defined. So today it is adjacent to the parkway as its only access, and we know that has been a concern of accessing that particular parcel via the Kiawah Island Parkway. So if there isn't a design consideration to allow access through one of the existing parcels adjacent to Beachwalker, that in itself is the concern of how do we gain access to develop that parcel, but it's not necessarily an undevelopable parcel.
More information, we'll hear from our residents, so go ahead if you would, Larry.
Yeah, just, John, I just want to just ask, is it, apparently, as I understand it, this has been driven by the fact that when the development agreement ends, we need to come up with a zoning that is appropriate for these. Now, you're recommending BW1 and BW2. And can we have, to have as a zoning, can we have the zoning that is consistent with the current number of units, let's say, the number of residents per lot that are consistent that they have right now? In other words, not to the point that the density issue is not so much the density per acre, it's the density per individuals per acre. It's a different measure. And if you've got more apartments, you're gonna have more people, more cars, everything at per acre. So is it possible that the planning commission could come up with another proposal, a potential proposal that mimics what we have right now and then applies the appropriate zoning to it?
Yes, sir.
I also just, 70% of the changes are straightforward, not really to be argued. So maybe for October 4th, we could move forward with approving that the 70% that are straightforward and gather more information about the other 30% that we're discussing.
Good point. Good point. I'm in the community. You've been patient. Go to the podium and give your name and address, please. Thank you.
Maria Sanseri, Sea Elder Court, and I've been listening. I was behind a big accident on Savannah Highway, but I've been listening to the whole discussion. My question is the premise for this, and why, obviously the developers had these other zoning ARDA allowances, but it expires. And an expiration is an expiration for a reason. And why do the zoning allowances of Toki, the ZLDR, they just don't take effect after the expiration? I mean, they haven't built by the expiration, so it would revert to that. And I guess I understand some lawyers have said we have to do some zoning changes, but I'm not so certain that I necessarily don't want a second opinion on that, and why, if we have to go with new allowances, why don't we just go back to the ones that were in place? They were in place for a good reason, and I'm not convinced that we have to, we definitely don't have to upzone, and that's what it sounds like to me. So that's my question.
Maura McIlvaine, 146 Blue Heron Pond Road. So I listened very carefully. BW1 and BW2, the purpose is to meet needs of residents and guests. Then I waited. And I didn't really hear how that met the needs of residents and guests. In fact, we didn't spend a lot of time in this discussion, the recent discussion about BW2, but I read the BW2 as permitting up to 55 feet for multifamily. Anybody want that on Lot 1? We're down near Sam Spit? So, I don't understand how this meets the needs of the residents and the guests. What I did hear, though, was, why are we doing this? This is not being initiated by the partners, John says. The ARDA is expiring, and we have to rezone these parcels. And my question was the same as hers. Doesn't it just revert to the prior zoning designation? Why do we have to rezone them right now? But then I heard it. It allows them to keep the benefits of the ARDA, is essentially, and actually get more. It's about hitting what the market dictates. Now, I could be misquoting you, John, but that's what I heard you say, and that's what I wrote down, and it helps them essentially monetize their investment. And they're entitled to, don't get me wrong. But I don't really care what the market dictates. I care what we need. I care what this community wants. I don't care whether they didn't build in time to hit their market. That is not our problem, and it's certainly not the job of the Planning Commission to make it come true. Thank you.
Larry Rutkowski, 232 Sparrowhawk. First, I'd like to compliment and thank Ms. Hennessy for putting this together. I've been trying to do it, and I'm not as adept as she is. Second, and perhaps more importantly, this mythology that seems to have built up around the notion that if the ARDA expires, we're all going to go poof and no longer be part of the universe couldn't be more inaccurate. If the ARDA expires, the ARDA expires. That's what happens. We revert to the extent that we think there may be some parcels that need to be grandfathered into a zoning, different zoning, because they were built while the ARDA was, they're not going to disappear in the darkness of night. You know, life doesn't work that way. Third, but very, very much related to that, I agree again, I'm going to borrow from Ms. Hennessy, this is not ready for prime time, this plan. Did you all notice the timing of this and how fast it's moving along? And then the portal through which you can make comments shuts on November 1. The cake is baked by November 1, according to the schedule that was put up there. We've already had a first reading. Recommendations have already been done. I mean, I don't know who thought of that timing. And finally, I am not envious of the Planning Commission members, because I also listened pretty carefully today, and I heard what was recommended, what was recommended, what was recommended. Not once did I hear why. I can suspect, but I'm not going to be that cynical today. But I'm utterly unconvinced that this plan was generated like the Big Bang and just emerged without influence by somebody. But I agree with those that have said this already. This doesn't benefit us as community members. Thank you.
Brad McElvain, 146 Blue Heron Pond Road. Going back to the gentleman who cited Cicero, who does this benefit? We never heard it benefits the community. We never heard it benefits the citizens of Kiowa Island. And that's the job of the town of Kiowa Island, including the staff. And we never heard once that this actually benefits the community. We heard it benefits because the ARDA may expire, and as people have pointed out, it expires. It's not our job, the town's job, to make sure that whatever things happen in the ARDA, it hangs around. The question that was asked and was never answered is, how does this benefit the community? And again, it was never answered. And until that's answered, I don't think they can move forward. That's all I'd like to say. Thanks.
I'll start tap dancing.
Go ahead.
Linda Leffler, 60 Sunlight Bend. I've heard in the explanation of this, there were several times. John Taylor mentioned about cleaning up things. I would urge the Planning Commission, if you're going to clean up something, get rid of any commercialization on Beachwalker Drive. We cannot handle any more traffic there. Just think of what's going to happen once Ocean Pines and Upper Beachwalker are in full built out and all the traffic that's going to come on Beachwalker. We do not need any commercial on Beachwalker Drive. Thank you.
I'm Cynthia Hadley, and I live at 1234 Kiowa Beach Drive, which puts me, think of Beachwalker 1 is directly across. And so as an owner there, I just want to say that I am very interested in less density, don't want to see buildings over the tree line, and anything that can be done to help that happen is definitely what this community needs. Greens Lake was built in 1977. It's a long-standing community. Sparrow Pond, same thing, and although it's Ocean Pines that will be developed up there, I would like the Planning Commission to make sure that they keep in mind that there are these long-standing developments right there. And specifically, you know, you were talking about buffers, the front buffer, the back buffer. I would just like you to think about the Beachwalker parcel, and you have a front bumper that's bigger than the back bumper, but that buffer is what faces communities, and the buffer for Ocean Pines will face Sparrow Pond. So I would also encourage to look at those buffers to make sure that those communities aren't adversely affected with the new lower density standards I'm sure you'll come up with. So thank you.
I will try to offer a couple of perspective setting comments. And I did spend 29 years of my life as head of strategic planning for a rather large international organization. Now that my planning experience was in the private sector, and I realized that public sector planning takes a different form. First I'll comment, these development agreements, ARDAs, whatever they're called, and just the zoning that is assigned to a piece of property. These are very valuable concessions that a municipality is essentially awarding, and they're economically very valuable. On the other hand, what is done with those concessions generates what economists call externalities. An externality is when I exercise my property rights in a way that affects your property, that creates an externality. Some externalities are negative, some externalities are positive. When I hire somebody to come on my property and provide music for a wedding that I have on my property, it might be a positive externality for some of you and a negative externality for others, depending on what kind of music I like and what kind of music you like. So the cost to the community of exercising one person's property rights are one of the things that a municipality has to consider in addition to property rights. Personally, I come down strongly on the side of property rights. I'm a big property rights guy. On the other hand, as I look at the developer, they want to have as much freedom of action as they can have in exercising their own property rights. I don't blame them. On the other hand, the developer for decades through their ARB has restricted our own property rights. And so there's a sort of conflict there. But from a planning perspective point of view, because these are valuable concessions, the planning staff, John and the others that he works with, are going to hear from a lot of people who either have a lot of interest of a purely financial nature or a lot of interest just because they want to live there and they want to enjoy their property the way they've enjoyed it for decades. Planning is hard work. I look at the details that go into this. There's a lot of hours that go into generating these kinds of plans. I know in the private sector, we made a distinction, a clear distinction between planning policy and plan development. It is the responsibility of some group of people, and it was my office in my place, and it's the planning commission here to provide planning direction and policy, an overall planning strategy. It's the responsibility of the planning staff to develop effective, executable plans that realize the planning policy, planning strategy, policy, and planning direction provided by the Planning Council. And I'm not trying to take cheap shots at anybody here, but watching the interaction here, I wouldn't want John's job the way it stands right now, because I get a sense that John has been trying, and the others involved with him, have been trying to carry out their job with less planning guidance and policy direction than I would have expected anybody in our planning organizations to do their work with. So I just leave that, and I don't want an invitation to be on this council, by the way. But I think that you guys owe John more direction, because if you don't give him direction, somebody's going to try to give him direction, and there's going to be a lot of self-interest baked into the direction that others try to give to him. So this is important work that everybody here is trying to do together. Everybody has their own interest. I appreciate that. There's no reason that the process has to be dysfunctional. So from an old planning guy, I've seen planning done badly, and I've seen it done well. I've seen it done awkwardly more often than it doesn't look like a ballet usually. Usually it looks more like a hockey game. When you do make it look like a ballet, everybody enjoys it. When it looks like a hockey game, well, you get fights on the ice, folks.
Thank you very much for elevating public discussion and discourse and bringing CISRA into this discussion. I've never, ever had that happen before.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission and those in attendance. My name is Mark Primar. I'm here representing, I'm a property owner at 81 Dungannon, by the way, but I'm here representing Kiowa Partners, and I'd like to join my fellow planner. I've been here 44 years, going on 45, as largely involved with planning, and have a lot of scars to represent that involvement. I'm along with everyone else in this room in that I want to dispel a particular both direct and indirect statement that we have somehow been involved in what has been presented today. That's incorrect. I've had less than 24 hours to review the same documents that you've probably had the same amount of time. So I'm along with you about understanding what this is, how it impacts not only the property owner that I represent, but me as a resident property owner. What does it do to my community? I'm in the same position as you are. I will point out, though, that I think consideration of new zoning classifications that might be considered for the island, not just the parcels that are represented here, that are the principal focus, but others. The reason I say that is we have hundreds and hundreds of units and buildings that are non-conforming because of the existing zoning ordinance for the R3 category. And I don't know if you're aware of that, but we have hundreds of those things. That's not a healthy thing to have. And the idea of creating more non-conforming uses with zoning classifications isn't something that you would generally want to do. You want to address the nature of land use patterns, both past and potentially present or future, in such a way. So I think this is a healthy exercise. I really do. I think this is a healthy exercise. There are a couple of things on your spreadsheet I'd like to share with you after the meeting that are not quite correct about existing Toki allowances, but if I could just meet with you about that. But I would like to reinforce that there is a path forward post-development agreement where it makes sense for the greater community. Creating, as referenced by the previous speaker, creating community is a messy business by any reasonable standards. But it's messy in a particular way, and I think we're all
in our own unique way, trying to make this a better transition period. The role of the development agreement has historically been for a certain time period that both parties to the agreement, both the property owner as well as the town representing all of us residents and property owners, that you can begin to, in both areas, begin to plan and anticipate the nature of development because of what's outlined in a development agreement. As one of the two development agreements expires, now the full role is for the town of Kiowa Island, all of us property owners. There's still a remaining development agreement that has a considerable amount of undeveloped land yet to be developed, and that's the resort. I don't know what else to say. I see a head nodding no, but there is an existing development agreement. Well, all right, we can have a friendly disagreement about whether that exists or not, but I'm representing that, how about we agree to this? There's a large amount of land yet to be developed that isn't necessarily associated with Kiowa Partners. I think we can nod on that, right? So anyways, I'm representing, I look forward to continuing the dialogue with everyone in this room and everyone that we represent going forward. This is a healthy sort of way to think about it, and look forward to the next session of the Planning Commission. Okay.
Jerry McGee, 17 Evening Bend. Along with Linda Leffler and those of us who live on Beach Walker, we have now started to learn what some of the traffic realities and the building realities are going to be in that particular area. One of the things that I firmly believe is that Kiowa is passing a tipping point. The Buddy Darby days when we all came on the island and there was that beautiful brand film of birds flying over and lots of open acreage and all that, that is long past now. And we're going to have to deal with the realities of the fact that developers have their rights, but we also have rights as a community. The idea that we are operating under the mantra of designing with nature absolutely makes me fall down and start crying when I walk by the Cape and I see 20 or 14 acres of forest that has been completely destroyed. And in its place is what I consider personally, just Jerry McGee, to be an atrocity. It is way out of character with this island, and we're on our way to be building more and more. If you look at what's on the schedule right now and the implications that that's going to have, I would urge our planning committee to take some time out to look at exactly what the impact of all the construction that's right in the process of starting now is going to have, in addition to what we might be approving in Upper Beach Walker and down on parcel number 1. So we have a lot of soul thinking, but one of the things that is very wrong, and even in the organization that I'm part of, KICA, is communications. And I have to take a lot of responsibility for KICA's communications because that's what I did. I was the head of a large international advertising agency, and I can write a lot of 30-second commercials to convince you of all sorts of things, but I've failed miserably in using all the tools for KICA to inform our community and to get them involved. We are not involved. Look, there's just a few people here, and look how many people just aren't aware, don't know, and they only come to the table when you suddenly say, we're taking your property away. To what? How did that possibly happen? So I urge us all to work very hard to develop communication strategies, to have more meetings like this, but with more people. I wish we could fill the room up and get as many opinions as we can, because I think you'd all be shocked by how the average person who only comes here for a few, maybe a couple of months or a couple of weeks, actually feels about this island and things that they don't think are happening. Thank you for giving me the time to express that. And again, thank you for this planning committee for being candid and open, willing to listen. Thank you, John, for doing your job. I know it's a thankless job to be able to, put forward things that you and the committee feel are the right for the island. But if we do it right, we will have a much better island, but a much different island, and we have to accept that. Thank you.
Diane Flaherty, 6 Sundown Bend. I wasn't going to speak, but Jerry inspired me to speak as one of the few people who are in this room. While I wrote something on the portal to the Planning Commission, I feel like I have an opportunity right now, standing here in front of you, to speak to you directly. So I thought I would do that. I owe that to you all. I also owe it to the 12 women that I'm on an email thread with, who are very much representing those few people that are sitting over there, none of whom, except for one, could be here today. But I will tell you, Jerry, there are a lot more people that wanted to be in this room that aren't, but they're listening to what we're saying. So as a 31-year property owner in Inlet Cove, and now a permanent resident in Inlet Cove, I represent the community that the intention is to safeguard. And I really want to underline that. I very much appreciate your asking that question before about who are we safeguarding here. Because honestly, if you listen to the community, what makes us safe is not having more density. It is literally not safe on Beachwalker right now because of density that already exists. So if we increase that density, we are not safe. I am not interested in protecting the market. I'm interested in protecting the community. So thank you for listening to that. I implore the commission to make a proposal that counters that and makes us feel safe. Thank you.
Denise John, 67 Eugenia. I wasn't going to speak either, but listening to the proposals, my main concern is I don't want Kiowa to turn into Hilton Head. That's all.
Into Hilton Head.
Letters will be put into the public record, and we just appreciate your comment. We realize as the Planning Commission this is very important, and I can assure you that we do listen. So thank you. I have a motion to adjourn this meeting. Wait, John, you're gonna keep this meeting going, aren't you?
You guys don't show up for my regular meetings. I like to have this energy here. Just a few things before we adjourn. I did take some copious notes, and so I want to get some next steps outlined before we leave today. So we do have the October 4th meeting scheduled. And so as part of that, what I'm going to do is take things that I've heard today, massage, and maybe some guidance from you, maybe work with one or two commissioners to look at that ahead of our October 4th meeting to see if that is appropriate to bring forth. I did make some notes based on some things that were shared. I do feel important to share why we're doing this again. And there's a few comments made relative to us reverting back to the existing zoning. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this today, because the existing zoning would not be possible based on our current zoning map. And so that's the reason why it's not an effort to rezone a property to retain rights of the existing ARDA, but it is to fill a void that we don't have in our current base zoning district in our zoning code. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. I've taken a lot of notes here and I've listened, and so what I will do is, like I said, make some next steps and then present that back to the commission. And the final thing that I wanted to share was the timeline for this. This process did not just start this month. The council, town council, even end of December, when this initiated the expiration of the 2013 town council and our annual retreat at the beginning of the year, these things were listed there. And so this has been an ongoing conversation since the beginning of this year. So we're just kind of getting into the meat of it, but this has been presented to the community as far as this being a process that the town will undertake as part of that expiration of the 2013 ARDA. The one other note is public comments. So we have continued to receive your public comments via email. We set up the portal so that it could make it easier for us to accept those and package those to deliver to our planning commission members and town council. So I do urge you to submit via the portal. If it might be a little bit difficult for some, but it does help us to be able to package those much more quickly because it's coming through one central location. And so if you are communicating, this is really more for the community, if you are communicating with others in neighborhoods, encourage them to use the portal. Not to say that we're going to discredit if you do send an email, but it does help if you do send those comments via the portal, because we can staff quickly, easily package those in a manner to deliver those to our review bodies. I won't take up any more time, Mr. Chair.
I just ask one clarifying question for John. Yeah, I think it's an important one. So you say there is no base zoning classification currently in the code with respect to some of the parcels because they are dual zoned, that there is no dual zoning in the code currently. Is that right?
Correct.
So I just want to understand your recommendation, and I won't touch upon the recommendation itself, is a mixed use, combining those two. But a recommendation could be simply to replicate what is already there. You could have in the code a dual zoning, R3/C or R2/C, rather than mixed use, in which case the developer would have to choose one or the other, but they couldn't by right do both. Is that correct?
Yeah, so one of the things that Mr. Iwan or Mr. Dowdy mentioned earlier today is that if the Planning Commission wanted to make a recommendation for a new classification, a new zoning district, that would be on the table. And so one of those things is if it wanted to be a new zoning district, that would allow, use the word optional, of a choice to say, hey, this can be commercial or residential based on whatever standards are outlined, and that could be something that's crafted within that new ordinance, new district.
Either or, but the mixed use which is proposed would allow them to do both by right.
So that can be a clarification today. So even in the standards that have been presented as far as this Beach Walker 1 or 2, if there wanted to be an additional standards in there that says, hey, based on this zoning classification, you have to choose a certain land use type that applies, that can be built into this structure already, or it can be, as you shared, hey, something new, other category. But as far as from an application standpoint, we would just want to make sure that we understand that it's clearly written in. And so I think that's the more important piece for me as staff, making sure that however it's written and explained to that property owner, their potential development rights.
Permitted uses table, just to make sure I'm reading that correctly. For example, a bar lounge would be a permitted use on the Beach Walker parcels under this table. It would be a conditional use, but that is, it looks like that's subject only to the planning director approvals, no other process. Is that correct?
For
bar found.
Yeah, so that mirrors the existing conditions. I didn't change any of those standards today. So based on our existing standards are in the code, any of those things that are in conditional would be an administrative approval so as they meet those conditions.
Today, one of the recommendations that didn't come up was with regard to Sam Spit, to go from R1 to Parks and Recreation.
R1.
You 1 to Parks and Recreation?
So the recommendation is for that to remain as R1. It was kind of difficult to explain that split, whether you have one parcel with sort of a floating zone, for lack of better words. So that area has that floating zone of a R3/C as well as R1. And so the recommendation is for that entire parcel to become R1.
So moved.